Hey, Ryan, it's great to see you again. Why don't you tell the people who you are and what you do?
Julio, awesome, man. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Been looking forward to it all week. Again, my name is Ryan Stanley. I am a life and self-leadership coach from New Jersey. I'm also an author and lifelong entrepreneur. So I love creating businesses. I consider entrepreneurialism a form of art. I kind of feel like it's, when you look at artists, you look at musicians, you look at artists of any type, they start off with nothing but a blank slate often and something in their mind, right? And entrepreneurs are no different. They take the time to build it. And so that's part of being an entrepreneur that I love. I love being creative. I love coming up with different types of businesses. I love connecting with people. More specifically, though, I've also spent about 10 years working for IPEC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. And I was their internal coach. So I coached all of their staff from entry level up to the C-suite and CEOs. I also did some admissions work with them as well, where I people who were interested in becoming a coach, I did sales for them, right? So I would kind of walk them through the program and get them enrolled if it was a good fit. Awesome. But in general, man, yeah, I mean, I believe living on purpose doesn't happen by accident, and I try to do it every day in any capacity I can.
Well, that's fantastic. One thing I wanted to make sure we touched on was your book, being an author and some of the pieces in your book. Can you tell me a little bit more about it and where they can find it, that sort of stuff?
Sure. Yeah, happily. And thanks for the opportunity. So the book is called Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful. It's with a subtitle of a first aid kit for the emotional bumps, scrapes, and bruises of life.
I like that.
And yeah, and that's exactly what it is, man. I mean, I'm not an amazing reader, right? I certainly, I think there's some huge, powerful, awesome books out there that will change your life if you make the time to read them. I'm not always great at making the time to read them.
Sure.
Or I'll get 3/4 of the way through, or, my challenge is I'll read the same page over and over and over again. Just my brain goes elsewhere. So, as a coach for over a decade, as someone who worked with all sorts of different people in all different areas of their life, I just found some common themes that were some basic things that people really focus on that can change. And those were patience, those were presence, there was joy, these different things that may seem like difficult or stressed or out of reach when we're in times of overwhelm. And so I kind of wanted to put them into something that was quick and easy for people to digest, right? So to my point earlier, like I don't want to sit down and spend a week reading a 300-page book. If I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed right now, I kind of want something that I can take right now. I can open up and I can read in 30 minutes and have skills, have actionable items, have a way of being that I can kind of, okay, now I know who I want to be in this moment and I can take action on it. So the book was created in twofold. One, like that, so you can read straight through it. And again, it's a light read. Typically takes about 35 to 40 minutes to read. But then secondly, as a first aid kit, it's intentionally created to where you can open it to any given page at any point and find something on that page that will serve you. It might be a quote from somebody else. It might be a highlighted passage in the book. It might be a quote from me, but they're clear. It's like, it's okay, universe or whatever, what do I need right now? Just pick a page to open up to and you'll find something that will serve you. So that's the whole intention.
What is your favorite page, favorite chapter or segment in the book? Your kind of go-to?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I definitely do the random open up every once in a while.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting for me to answer as I'm thinking out loud because each chapter is unique. So there's 5 chapters altogether. There's a prologue, there's 3 chapters, and then there's an epilogue.
Okay.
And the prologue just talks about the concept that we are a creator. We're always creating at any given moment. As people who write ad copy, you're constantly creating something, right?
Sure.
But I mean, in general, right now, you and I are creating 2 men recording an awesome podcast.
Yeah.
Right. When you wake up in the morning, if you decided to put on blue socks, blue shirt, blue shorts, and a blue hat, you are literally creating a man dressed in blue. But we also create conversation, we create art, we create laughter, we create music, we create businesses. We're always and always creating. Right. Even if, when you're sleeping, you are creating a human being who is sleeping, right? So just by being, we're creating something from a perspective.
Yeah.
And so what a lot of people don't realize is that when we are angry or we are overwhelmed or we're sad or stressed, we are creating anger. We are creating anxiety. We are creating overwhelm. We are creating stress, sadness. It doesn't mean those aren't valid. It doesn't mean that, that they shouldn't be showing up for us. But in truth, we are creating them from inside.
Right.
So the prologue talks about that. And then chapter 1 is, okay, now that you know that, if you're feeling stressed, you're feeling overwhelmed, a lot of the time it has to do with time or there not being enough of it. So what would it be like to create patience? Now, this is a long way for me to answer your question. But so I guess as I'm thinking out loud, what I like most about it is that it is So once you realize it's something that we can all do, patience, presence, and joy are all things that we can create. So there's not a specific point. The epilogue, though, then, so chapter 1 is be patient, chapter 2 is be present, chapter 3 is be joyful, but the epilogue is keep going. Yeah. And so I think, actually, as I'm thinking out loud, that might be my favorite part. It's like you get to the point where, listen, on your best day, on your worst day, keep going, right? If you can just repeat those 2 words as a way to start off your day and figure out wherever I am, if I keep going, I'm going to keep going, right? As obvious as it sounds, but the only way for me to get off path of my purpose is for me to not keep going.
See, when I'm listening to you, part of me is thinking, because I started thinking, while you're talking, I'm going, okay, consistency is one of the keys in establishing your, keep going, right? It's consistency, whether it's putting yourself out there in social media or whether it's running the business and trying to consistently make sales. But there's also a negative side of consistency. And what I mean by that is, like, you can also consistently make the choice to be angry, to be upset. And that to some extent, that is what neuroscience has taught us, is that you can kind of be choosing those emotions. Like, emotions flare up, they are there, they are present, but not allowing yourself to kind of meditate down, to not push it down, but not to explode out either, to calm that wave, I think is something that a lot of people miss when it comes to anxiety and things like that,
And it's huge. And so it's a difference between reacting to life and responding to life, right? When we react, it's just kind of a knee jerk. It's like a thing. Oh my gosh, I'm reacting. And that can become a habit, right? I just react to what happened. And the more I think about bad things are happening to me, the more that reaction is going to come out.
Right.
And to your point, to instead create a habit of responding. Okay. So I heard the situation that's in front of me. It gives me a minute to pause and choose how I would prefer to respond.
Sure.
So, and that's where patience comes into gear, right? Right off the bat. That's why it's chapter 1, is because so many times people who are starting businesses or in this place, they want everything to be done and perfect now. Right.
Yeah.
And they feel like, oh, once I'm making $1 million, then everything will be good. I won't need anything else. Well, you're just going to have different problems, right? Or different challenges or different opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
And so if you know what you want, and I'll just use that $1 million as an example, getting stressed that it's not here right now, or getting stressed that somebody didn't get back to you in an email, or getting stressed because, all these different things that occur in running any business on any given day, as opposed to being patient and creating someone who's patient in the moment. That's, to your point, that's when you start to choose to meditate down, to kind of relax for a minute. Okay, who do I want to be?
Right.
Patient. A lot of the time when I bring up patience, especially entrepreneurs, they're like, well, listen, I'm not just going to sit around and do nothing and wait for this to happen.
Sure.
And I'm not insinuating that at all. Like, really quite the opposite. Well, there's certainly, if you're having overwhelming days or weeks or something, it makes sense to rest and give yourself self-care. But patience isn't doing nothing. Patience is just deciding who you want to be while you're waiting, or while you're, you know what I mean? So it's about having control over who you want to be in any given moment. And knowing, by the way, that whatever you want will occur, right, as it's supposed to. And so just, keep doing your part in the meantime.
Yeah. And one thing I would even add to that maybe is the idea of like mindful patience. And what I mean by that is not just, because I think when you're talking about like not giving up, which I think is a pretty universal message when it comes to people trying to, whether it's through therapy or self-help or whatever, right? You can give up without actually giving up. So like, let's just say parenting, right? Parenting can be incredibly difficult. You have kids, and sometimes, some days you wake up and they tackle you and everything's great, and you wake up with giant smiles, and other days you wake up and there's just vomit on the bed or something, and they've rolled around in it. You're just like, what is going on? And you're just upset, and everything's going bad. The dog comes in with mud, like, and you can very much just put them down on a, in front of a tablet or TV or something and ignore them. And you can ignore them for days or weeks, or some people months, depending on, not to say that everybody's in this camp, but I've had a couple experiences with some of the like wives and stuff that I've spoken to around here on base, and like they're like, oh, I can't wait for school to open up. And it's like that, which is fine. Again, like depending on what you want, if you need to work and all that, I totally get it. But when I'm like, they go, oh, because my child, they're not experiencing life and they can't connect with anybody. And I'm like, it's part of your job to connect with them while they're here. Like, are you playing with them? Are you creating crafts? Are you making catapults and going outside and jumping on the trampoline and stuff? Or are you sitting them down in front of a TV, and then you're sitting down in front of another TV, eating snacks all day, and just being like, oh, my life is so difficult. Like, it's not someone else's job, whether it's teachers or other kids or or babysitters to take care of your kids. Like, you need to be actively pursuing that relationship, and even your relationship with your spouse or your significant other. Like, you have got to show up. You can't just clock in every day, because that in itself is, you are there, thus the patience, but you're not mindfully there. You're not actively trying to better your relationship or you better yourself.
Totally. And two things. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I forgot what the first one was, so I'll go to the second one, which is, that's why chapter 2 is called Be Present. To your point, right? It's like, it's not just phoning it in. It's like, what I was going to say is, to your point, like, be who you want your kids to be, right? At any given point in that space. If you're ever having any challenges with parenthood, a big lesson that I learned was, who do I want? And that means in front of my kids, and even not in front of my kids, right? As often as possible. Because you then start to develop your own habits of who you want your children to be. And they're always learning from you. They're always listening, whether they know it or not, whether you know it or not. They're taking things in, and they're becoming more of who they're going to be based on the people who they spend the most time with. But yeah, mindfulness. And that's why chapter 2 is Be Present, right? So be present with your children, be present with your business, be present with yourself. If you're so worried about what's going to happen in the future, what someone else somewhere else said, or what someone else somewhere else thinks of you, or what I said 3 weeks ago, or, all these different things, that takes you out of the now. And when you can be here now intentionally and purposefully, and sometimes people, especially people who are new to a self-development space, or have spent a lot of their life reacting, say, well, I don't really know how to start that. It seems kind of wooey or new age. It's like, listen, a great way to start is, and this is something every human can do just about, is like, let me get clarity on what my 5 senses are doing, right? What am I hearing right now? What am I smelling right now? What am I seeing right now? And recognize, the beauty of life that is actually happening all around you at any given moment.
Sure.
And when you think about it, you start any given day, there is oxygen, there is gravity, there is sunlight out there just so that you can exist.
Sure.
And you know what I mean? Like, literally today is a gift.
Right.
And so knowing that this whole experience that we call life is really a gift for you to do something with, to waste physical energy on stress or anxiety. And again, I'm not belittling anybody's experience, and I certainly get stressful days, and I'm not taking away from that.
Sure, of course.
But to be aware of it, right? And to say, how much time and physical energy do I want to focus my thoughts on being angry or stressed or overwhelmed, when I could instead choose to be curious and be like, what does patience feel like right now? What would it be like if someone else was present? How would they be behaving? Right. So you can take it outside yourself and stop telling yourself the story of all the reasons you can't be present or patient, and be curious as to how you could be.
Right. And I think mindfulness is sort of a long-term game plan. I think a lot of people fail at this because they think of it as well, in general, we live in an age where our attention span's limited, and and this isn't something that's new, of course, but, fad diets and all these other things that we want to lose 100 pounds in, 10 days. And if we don't have a 6-pack after a week of a keto diet, we're just pissed. And it obviously doesn't work. And these are all scams.
Yeah,
exactly. And I think mindfulness is something like that, right? It's not so simple if people are listening to what we're talking about, and they're going to take some of the tips that you spent years curating and understanding. They might say, okay, great. I'm going to be mindful. I'm going to talk about these 5 senses. I'm going to think about them next time I argue with my spouse, let's just say. Sure. And then the argument comes, and they go, all right, let me try what Ryan was saying. And they try to hear, and they try to smell and see and all that. And yet there's still a part of them that's going to be like, no, you know what? Fuck this. I'm out. I don't care. I'm going to slam this door. I'm going to yell. And then they'll say, well, Ryan obviously had no freaking clue what he was talking about. But that's not the case, obviously. The thing is that you need to understand that this is something that's going to take time. It's going to take energy and consistency and effort. And it's not a quick fix, like, oh, I'm just going to think of this, count to 10, like they teach in some anger management classes, and I'll be completely fixed. No issues.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
No,
I think it's important.
Yeah. I mean, it's taken you X amount of years, let's say anywhere, depending on who you are listening to this, you're somewhere between 15 and 70 years old. It's taken you X amount of years to build up all those habits of anger and quick stress reaction and slamming the doors and saying, forget this guy or whatever. And a lot of the time you spend so many times in arguments where you're more focused on being right than you are being happy. And so that's been your go-to. And that's something that people just do by nature. But when you start to, in those moments, and absolutely recognize, okay, it's taken me, I'll just use the number 35. It's taken me 35 years of habits to be who I am in this moment.
Right.
It's not going to take you a day or a week of trying to be present during an argument with a spouse to all of a sudden kind of get it right.
Right.
But I think Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say that that's something that I actually find empowering. During like times that I've struggled with like weight loss and things like that myself, as a kid, I had, we kind of discussed this off air. I have asthma currently, and I had I was a chronic asthmatic as a kid, and like I lived in a hospital. My lungs collapsed a few times. Like it was pretty rough on me. So like I had no real experience when it comes to any physical activity. And coming from a Hispanic household, like everything was cooked in lard, and they gave you double scoops of everything instead of just one. And even now, like even though I'm like I think I'm right around like 210 ish, like my parents see me and they go, "Oh my God, you're so skinny," even though I'm like, "What are you talking about?" But they're just like, "Oh my God, you need to eat more." And then like my wife, I remember them calling her like anorexic because she was at that time this green-eyed, blonde-haired, and like. When I met her when we were teenagers, it was, she was like, 115, 120 pounds. And they just thought that was ridiculous. They were just all sorts of upset.
Yeah.
But I think it's very difficult. It's a struggle. It's something that you need to constantly do. And it's something that you just can't change right away, I guess is essentially what I'm really getting at.
Yeah. And to your point, it's like, okay, so and then be patient with yourself, right? So it's not only being patient with other things. It's about having a plan. It's knowing that you want something to change. It's knowing that your past doesn't equal your future, but your past has brought you to where you are now. So who do you want to be from here?
Right.
And when we add patience to the equation in any given moment, if there's changes that we want to make, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, you said like mindfulness is kind of a long game. And I think I'm quoting Simon Sinek, and I saw him once speak publicly, and he said that, really, it's not a long game. It's a eternal game. Life is an eternal game, meaning in the sense there's no real winning at any point. You keep going. And as soon as you get to a certain point that you feel like you've accomplished what you want to accomplish, there's going to be new things to accomplish or new changes that you want in your life. And
actually, I remembered what I was talking about. It was the sense of empowerment that I got from the weight loss journey. And what my point and whole to that was that because you mentioned like it took you 35 years, whether consciously or not, because as a child, maybe you saw your parents argue and all that. So you've been kind of ingrained that into who you become or how you see relationships. But you took 35 years to develop this. And you said, well, it's and I see what you just said about it being a long-term lifetime type of situation. I think that's true, right? Because again, going back to the weight loss thing, like you have to think of food as a lifestyle change, not just a diet, right? So in that sense, completely, completely accurate. But the one thing that, like I said, find empowering, because I think some people might see the lifetime aspect of it and get overwhelmed.
Feels too long. Like, oh my gosh, I don't have. I do want it better now. I don't want to be stressed now. I don't want to be overwhelmed now. Whatever it is, yeah.
But what I think is like just like the weight loss thing, like maybe it took you 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever, to gain all this weight. But it's actually only going to take you maybe a year or 2 years to lose it all. Now you spend the rest of your life trying to maintain that physique and living a healthy lifestyle so you can keep your energy and your focus and your clarity and all that. But it actually took you substantially less time to fix it, but it is still time. It is just time that you are actively having to pursue and work.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And then with that, if you realize, kind of going back to chapter 2 of presence, that there is only now. In the grand scheme of things, it feels like there was a long history before us and it feels like there's a future. But in the grand scheme of things, our past are just a bunch of memories of previous nows, right? So in any given moment, if you're feeling overwhelmed, it's just not going to take a day. But if every day you decide to show up and recognize, okay, today's the only day I have, what am I doing with it? And if your focus is weight loss, or if your focus is building a business or whatever it is, what is the best use of my time today? How can I be moving forward that? If you get worried about it all having to change immediately and I have to be perfect within the next week, then you're going to be likely disappointed.
Sure. Yeah. So bringing up something like that, like that's part of the reason why I decided to go ahead and see a therapist, which is because to work through my own issues, whether that was issues of my self-worth and because of my physique and all these other issues that I faced as a child and abuses and things like it occurred to me, I'll tell you, it was a comedian by the name of Theo Vaughn. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he has a podcast, and I was listening to him one day, and he sometimes talks about that kind of stuff, like in terms of like trying to let go of his past and what he calls it the dark arts, and he's talking, and so he's talking about all that, and he said something that I felt was pretty powerful and actually made me decide to actually see a therapist. Was he said, and this is him talking, and I might butcher it a bit, but it's something to this extent. He said, I'm 35, and he said, and if I, like, it's no longer my parents' responsibility to, like, I can't keep blaming them as a 35-year-old man. You know, like, at some point I have to take this, and whether I like it or not, like, I have to try to fix myself, you know, whether I couldn't blame somebody else or not.
Yeah.
You know?
And totally true. And I've had a very similar experience just in my own life with I've had a conversation like that with my brothers, because my father wasn't he's not this awful, evil, abusive man, but he wasn't the best father. I'll leave it at that for now. Right. And like, it occasionally comes up when I'm talking to my brothers. I was like, listen, man, like, who cares? Like, literally nobody cares that your dad behaved this way. And when it comes down to it, your dad, meaning my dad, behaved exactly who he, you know, based on the life that he led, every single second of life that he led up until that moment, he was showing up exactly as he should have.
Right.
There were opportunities for him to grow or change if he was seeking that, but he didn't. But literally, for me to sit here and blame, why was he different? Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Because he didn't, because that's not who his life led him to be. And we're all the same way. So we're all exactly who we should be for every single second of life that we've lived up until this moment. And again, so now what do we want to do with it? And to your point, it's like, okay, seeing a therapist, getting a coach, just deciding to be more mindful of your behavior and see how it affects others. Like, all these different things that we can now decide to do can really change everything pretty in a great way.
I 100% agree. There's one thing I kind of want to, it's sort of the elephant in the room, right? And it's you kind of brought it up a little bit ago, where it's like, I think some people that are listening to this think this all sounds good in theory, but they are maybe a little hesitant because of the idea of like self-help and woo-woo and whether it's a giant, you know, snake oil salesman type of situation. And, you know, I want to bring that up because I think that's important to talk about, you know, because I'm sure there are probably people out there, coaches or whatever, that are just bullshit artists, you know, like, and I think that's something you can find in life, right? Like, as an general example, sales, I think like 70% of the world probably hates a salesman to some extent. Like, they're just like, they're going to somehow trick me out of my money. And so they see car salesmen or whatever, and they go, oh, these guys are scummy. But there are certainly a lot of car salesmen that are fantastic. I was worked in sales. I've had many employees behind me that have worked in sales, and I've always trained them to be truthful and forthright with whatever they're selling, and to sell with integrity, even if that means you do lose a sale. At least at the end of the night, you can sleep and you don't have to put out fires in the morning with angry customers and things like that. Like, I'd rather have a sales force that I don't have to worry about all the customer service issues, even if I'm not, you know, even if I'm losing a couple sales here and there.
Numbers are a little bit lower, Right.
So that's just my experience. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about that and see your thoughts on the woo side of things and how people maybe have seen you, or some things that people have talked about with you, and how you've been able to kind of help them compartmentalize that or go beyond that thinking of like, Ryan, are you trying to, you know, scam me out of my money?
Right. Yeah, totally. So, and it's a great question to ask. So I think for anybody who's looking for a coach out there, the first thing and what I would do, knowing that I've been, you know, in the industry for over 12 years now, is you want to make, in my opinion, you do want to make sure that your coach is certified, right? So you do want to find somebody that has some sort of a certification, and typically by an organization that's recognized by the ICF, or the International Coaching Federation.
Sure.
Because there are you know, there are standards out there that should be met, I think. But from a coaching standpoint, there's all sorts of different types of coaches out there, different types of personalities, different types of industries. A lot of coaches, like when I first started coaching, I spent the first 5 or 6 years coaching musicians and people in the music industry. So I was able to kind of connect with them and it was a specific area of expertise that I had because I used to manage bands. And so I love music. I love being around creative people. And so it's easy for me to focus on. From the woo-woo standpoint, I mean, everybody's going to have, like, I think the great part about the time that we live in compared to any other is that there's so much information accessible, so much education accessible in regards to what might be considered woo-woo. So if somebody's saying stuff that just seems like a little bit too weird for you, like, then cool, move on, right? Like, do some research on it. If it's something you might just first be open to the fact that it might just be something you never learned about before. Right. Especially when it comes down to like quantum physics and it comes down to different aspects of mindset and intention and you know, programming the subconscious and all these different things. So I would just say that to anybody out there, you know, there's a lot of great information out there. So don't push off everything as woo-woo, especially if you align with somebody's way of being. I think a great coach is somebody who, when people always ask me, like, Ryan, what makes a great coach? And the answer for me always comes with the ones who are able to really hold your agenda.
Sure.
And that's actually why coaching is working and powerful, because a lot of the time we have friends, we have family, we have people who love us, and for us to go to them for guidance or advice in our business or in our life, a lot of the time they have their own agenda. That agenda might be they love us and they don't want us to get hurt, or that agenda might just be they don't want it. Well, who knows? But it has more to do with them than it does to do with us, right? And it's not done out of malice necessarily. But when you work with a coach, the best coaches are the ones who can really hear, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want to be different about your life? And then really focus in on what's the best way to make that happen. And so I would say, if anybody out there, do your research, make sure you align with the person. Like, just even mostly, listen, if you're going to be connecting with this person once a week and you're going to invest $1,000 a month or whatever it is to kind of connect with them, you're going to want to be sure that you enjoy spending time with this person.
Right.
Do some research, find out what type of content they've created in the past. Where they have blogs, they have videos. Well, check them out on social media.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I 100% agree. And I think I like what you're saying as far as do your research, do your due diligence, don't necessarily go in with your eyes closed and being like, this is going to change everything. And, like, regardless. But also don't go in saying my goal is to disprove every single thing, because then you're going in with a negative mindset and you're not even willing to entertain the thought or the experience or the emotional connection. Because I think that's kind of an important part, because to be truthful with you and to the audience. And I think a lot of people that know me know this. Excuse me. I don't have a particular belief system, I suppose you could say, when it comes to churches and overall creator. However, I've actually been going to church. Well, not now because of the COVID thing, but initially before this, because I liked the vibe. I liked the energy. I liked the people. I liked the overall kind of organization of it. There's so many other things that I liked about church that I was like, hey, you know what? Even if I don't necessarily come into
worship your
believe
God
the same thing or whatever, right? Like, generally, I like the people. I like the songs. I like this. I like that. I can clap along. I can wake up and feel energized this Sunday. I don't have to be vehemently against this and be like, every single one of these people are sheep. Ah, ha, ha. I'm the smartest guy in the room. Look at me. Yeah. I can just allow myself to be encompassed in the emotion and say, you know what, even if I don't believe in a overall creator of heaven and earth, maybe I can at least take the idea of love and presence and joy, and people are hugging and shaking hands, and my kids are having, making friends with their kids. And what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going in, I'm not going in eyes closed. Like, again, I know some of these people are also jerks outside of church, but I'm also just going in to gain that emotional connection.
Yeah, totally. I was about to say, experience community, experience connection. And in fact, when you're with all these different people who are creating love in their heart, whether it be for their God or just for a human or life itself, when you're around that, your body will have a physical reaction. And so the more we can surround ourselves with love, with compassion, with joy, with gratitude, like all those different things that you can get in a church setting, I think it'll make all the difference in the world. I definitely see value there. And the other thing is, listen, man, I mean, if you take anybody who's extremely successful, what they do, they didn't do it one day a week for an hour, right? No matter what it is. They didn't do it a couple days a week for a couple hours. They typically focused every day on it in some capacity, and sometimes up to 16 hours a day. If you take Olympic athletes, you take your most successful business people, it takes focus to be the best at anything, or the best version of yourself at anything.
Sure.
And so self-development, personal growth, there is very similar. I mean, or exactly the same, I should say. It's not even similar. It is. I mean, literally, those who have a peaceful, joyful, passionate life that they love waking up in the morning, they chose to be that way. There was something about them at some point when they said, listen, I understand that this moment is a gift, and I understand that I have choice in the matter in who I want to be and how I want to show up, and the types of people I want to surround myself with, and the types of conversations that I want to have, and what I'm looking to create. All these different things. That's all a choice. And when you focus on it every single day, that, in my opinion, and this is kind of taking it back a little bit, that's what a good coach does. They help you. A good coach doesn't give you the answers. A good coach isn't like, hey, I've had a perfect life, and if you do everything I've done, you're going to also have a perfect life.
Sure.
It's quite the opposite. They might have some suggestions based on lessons that they've learned in their journey, But really, a good coach is going to recognize that you have the answers already. You're just blocked by fears, and you're blocked by limiting beliefs, and you're blocked by past experiences, all of which make perfect sense based on the life you've lived. They're just not necessarily serving you.
Right. And I think, very similar to therapists, right? Like a lot of people go into therapy thinking two things. One, I'm going to go in and I'm going to be fixed right away in my very first session. And two, that if I'm talking to this therapist, I better make sure that he's never been divorced, or she's never had an affair, or she, like whatever the case, like you expect this perfect person if they're going to be giving you advice. And I think that's obviously the downside of that mindset, is that then you start nitpicking everybody's faults, and we're just people at the end of the day. We all have faults. So in reality, you should be going to that therapist because, like you were saying before, just like coaches, you have that emotional connection. You like what they're saying. Because some therapists, you may go in and they're just like, hey, I think you should just leave your husband like right away. I wouldn't even suggest it, or they fall asleep. I had one therapist that fell asleep on me while I was trying to talk about trauma in my childhood. And I'm looking up from a Kleenex box, and I look up and this guy's just snoozing on the side of the, I'm like, okay, well, that was good. So it's not right. So, it's like one of those situations where it's like, it may not always work out, but you should always constantly strive to find that person for you, sort of like dating or a relationship, right? Like you didn't just expect your very first girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever to be like, maybe there was something about that you really wanted to be the one, but it didn't necessarily come out that way. But you go to the next date, you go to the next person, and you eventually find that person that you are wanting to be with.
Totally. And then along those lines, also to kind of go back to the woo-woo point, and I kind of started to touch on this, but again, there's so much information about like the human psyche out there, right? So if you're having challenges and you're thinking, hey, I might want to work with a coach for my business, I might want to work with a coach for my life. Again, like spend some time. Like if you're spending 10 hours a week, binge watching a single season of something on Netflix, you could be spending at least 6 of those, watching things on YouTube that could serve your purpose, that are motivational, that are different truths, or that are educational in the way of how your mind works or how your body works physically, or things that will make you more of who you want to be.
Sure.
And so getting of that information and deciding who you want to be ahead of time before even finding a coach sometimes can be a big part of it as well. Because then once you start to have these conversations, and they do bring up different things like so for instance, I work with my clients, we always talk about what I call my I am statements, or a North Star document, or where you decide what you want your life to look like. You literally make time to write it down. And then you physically, once you write it all down, we go over it and we write it now into like the present tense. And then you read it aloud every single morning when you start your day, and every night before you go to bed, and often sometimes, at lunch, whatever works best for you. But some people say, oh, that sounds kind of weird and silly. Who am I going to be sitting there saying this to? It's like, well, you're just saying it to life. You're just reminding your subconscious of who you want to be. So on a very basic level, that might come across as something like, well, I don't know what this guy's talking about. Why would he have me do these things? He doesn't know anything about my life, right? Right. But then if you were ahead of time to do research on linguistic programming, and how the subconscious works, and just all these different things, you start to see the value in it. And then when you have this conversation, it doesn't seem as woo-woo as it might have been to somebody else, like 60 years ago, who had no exposure to any type of information or education that's out there.
Right. And one thing I want to kind of ask you, because again, I'm thinking listeners are listening to this. And again, the idea being like, oh, this all sounds great. Do you, and I hate to put you on the spot, I'm just going to ask real quick, do you have anything for the listeners in terms of like how to help overcome some anxiety or trying to break those kind of negative thought patterns? Because here's a quick example, and it's something that's extremely common. So this is why I'm going to use it, is like social media, right? It can really weigh you down as a business owner, because you want all these likes, and you want engagements and comments and shares, and you want people DMing you saying, I want your services right away, or your product. You want all these things. And then you do whatever, you do your 30 hashtags, you put out a picture, and then sometimes it's crickets, and you may get like 2 likes or something with no comments, and all these things. And you're like, man, I spent 45 minutes working on this, between the images and the copy and posting and scheduling, and I did all this stuff, and I got for not, at least that's how it feels at that time. And I think part of the problem is the idea of expectation that I deserve something.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to know, like, if we put that into that kind of thought perspective, is there something you can tell the listeners about trying to overcome that anxiety or that thought of I deserve this now, and if I don't get it, I just want to quit?
Yeah. So, and I will move past like what I'm about to say in a second, but without saying silly, it is about patience. It is about presence, right? So be patient. I mean, to the whole point, like you're not going to get 1,000 likes in this moment. You're necessarily, especially if you're starting off. It's not necessarily going. It doesn't mean that your work wasn't valuable. Doesn't mean that your time wasn't valuable. Doesn't mean it's not creating something.
Yeah.
But if you take, your favorite musician, they probably had like a couple gigs in the beginning where they'd put hours and weeks and months and years into practicing, and they had a gig someplace in the city, and they went there and 3 people showed up. And meanwhile, they've been spending weeks and months, being this. Doesn't mean it wasn't a great performance. Doesn't mean that, it wasn't intentional. Doesn't mean it's not serving them for the future.
Right.
So in those moments of stress and overwhelm, oh my God. So first of all, how can I create someone who's patient? I mean, it is a really important and powerful question.
Right.
But the second one is, so what's the lesson here? And sometimes the lesson itself is patience.
Yeah.
Sometimes the 45 minutes that you spent seeking hashtags and what to do, that in itself was the lesson. Yes, it didn't get the results that you wanted, but you might not have done it ahead of time. And now you know to do that every day or X amount of times a day, stuff that you don't have to do in the future. So really, when it comes down to it, one of the most important lessons that I've ever learned, and it really serves me in all areas of my life, is to get clear on to believe that it's a fact that life doesn't happen to you, life happens for you. And in any stressful moment or moment of overwhelm, if you were to say, why in the heck would this have happened for me? But you say it not with a pessimistic, not with a cynical, lean, but a genuine curiosity. How could this have possibly be happening for me?
Yeah.
And you start to utilize your right side of the brain. Like if that was the case, what would it be? And you start, so why would I have spent all this time and not had any results? I don't know. Let's come up with a couple answers. One, I learned the best way to post. 2, I learned what doesn't work maybe.
Right.
You combine that with the intent, with patience. I mean, Gary Vee talks about it all the time. Anybody on social media, I hope knows what Gary Vaynerchuk is. If not, take a look, look into him.
Sure.
But he always says, man, look at my posts from like 2012. Like you'll see there was 3 likes or no response whatsoever. Now he gets, thousands, he has millions of followers, whatever.
Right.
So know that where you are is not where you're going to be. That doesn't mean it's a reason to stop doing it.
Right.
Napoleon Hill talks a lot about that. In one of his chapters, there's a book called Think and Grow Rich. I hope a lot of you are familiar. If not, it definitely is a great place to start as well. But he talks a lot about the story about being 3 feet from gold. And there was the short version of the story. There was a guy who, like, based on some information, like decided to buy a gold plot, like back during the gold rush.
Sure.
And so he went out and he went back home and he got all this money from people in town, borrowed enough money to get all the equipment, started mining, and was there for like months and got nothing. And finally just gave up and left. And then somebody else came and bought his equipment from him, like hired somebody to kind of like do an excavation of the land, and figured out that this guy was 3 feet away from one of the largest gold veins in history.
Wow.
And so had he just and it wasn't like, had he either just A, kept going, or B, just found somebody who had some information that he didn't to help him take it to the next level, the initial person would have been where they wanted to be. Right. So 3 feet from gold is a huge lesson that a lot of us can utilize as well. Keep going.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, so actually in that, when you say keep going, do you think of that in terms of just a general a mindset and about life and like anything you try, or do you think of that in terms of like, even if it's something isn't working, keep going and keep trying? So I can also see some people and listeners, maybe they have a business that is like failing, or maybe the actual idea for the business just isn't, a thing anymore for some reason, coronavirus, or just the idea itself just isn't panning out. They didn't quite think it through, whatever the case is. Like, I can see the benefit of people. I can see how some people are going to say, oh, I should just listen to Julio and I should listen to Ryan, and I'm just going to keep going, even if this is going to cost me $25,000 tomorrow. And even if, all signs point south, this is not going to work out for you. So I guess my question is more like, how do you separate that thought pattern? Like, how do you clients, I'm sure you've had clients or customers that have maybe told you things about life, but maybe relationships, and you go, my husband's abusive, my wife's abusive. And you're like, but you can't really say keep going, but you don't necessarily want to say
Totally.
quit. You know what I'm saying?
100%. Yeah. So it's like when, and in a business standpoint, like when do you know to like, hey, it's not that I'm 3 feet from gold. It's just that this business isn't going to work. It would seem like a great idea, but when I really do the analysis, it's just not working. And now I'm bleeding every day. I'm losing money every single day. And there's right. As opposed to like, is it me just being negative and lazy for lack of a better, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So great question. And especially when you've been putting in, sometimes it's not lazy, but you've been putting in years, like you put in 2 years or whatever it is into this business. And you're like, I don't want to just throw it away either. Right? I do want to keep going, but so that's when, in my opinion, it's like, that's when it makes sense to bring in an expert in the field. Okay. If I look and get all the details, and then really you're still going to keep going, but now maybe you're going to say, how can I pivot? It could be pivot to a different business. But if you're not giving up on yourself as a human being that says, okay, now I'm a failure, right? That's where the keep going goes. So now I'm a failure. I sucked. My business didn't do what I said it was going to do. I might as well just do nothing and just give up on the rest of my life. That's painting with a broad brush, right? In those moments, you do want to bring in experts who say, here's what the market looks like. Here's really we'll look at all the details, and then you still make your best decision based on that information. Right. Sometimes, I mean, there is a time when you just know in your gut, like this is going to work out. If I just need to hang in there a little bit longer, I see what's going on, pay attention to, the field in front of you and look at all the different areas, what's taking, make educated decisions. And sometimes you're going to push a little bit past the experts who say, now it's time to change.
Sure.
And sometimes it's when we get to that point of the most stress and the most overwhelm when it really finally breaks, right? When we get, as a parent, I can always say, I always told new parents, it's like, listen, man, like when they first come home and they're not sleeping and they get to this point, like there's this one point where you almost reach like your final breaking point, and then it switches, right? And then all of a sudden they go through a new phase that is, going to be different and stressful in a different type of way, but you've almost gotten used to it, and the kids get used to it and they change a little bit. And, you take people like Elon Musk, who was right before PayPal was finally made it to where it was driving a car with like a hole in the front, like he had holes like literally in his car, and was like sleeping on a couch, all these different things, because he made it to the very end knowing that he believed in it. Right. So it's a great question. Everybody's experience is going to be a little bit different. So in that case, like with my clients, I will just coach them around. Like, let's look at every aspect of it. Let's look at the 360 before we make any type of a decision. And then also, don't necessarily make it immediately. Never make an emotional decision. That's a big part of it as well. Right. Make it logical. Because if we make big decisions like that when we're emotional, we typically are letting emotions guide us and not logic. Yeah. There's a really important way to use both. But if you're really just going on emotion in a big decision, whether it be changing your business or whatever, that's going to have a lot to do with it as well. So there's a lot of factors in there. But I think that the keep going part in the time when it is time to change direction, or listen, this is going to be a loss, is to recognize what are the lessons. What were the lessons from this entire experience? How can, and really in those moments where you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all this is coming to an end, just instead of, again, focusing your physical energy, right? When every time we have a thought, it is creating physical energy. Yeah. So instead of creating physical energy that is thinking about how shitty it was or how bad it went or what all the things that went wrong or how now you're at a loss, instead create physical thoughts and energy that are looking for the lessons and looking how I can take this and pivot it into what's better or what's best. Right. Or and then again, going back to, if we know this happened for me, right? Okay, I took me all the way to this point, and listen, my business is not, I'm going to have to cancel it, whatever. I'm closing my business down. How did this happen for me? Or I might be happy because I learned about this industry. I learned about this. I made this connection. I made this new partnership. I made all these different things. I wouldn't have been who I am without this. Cool. What's next? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think what I kind of got out of that, I mean, obviously I got a ton of information from you, but I mean, like if I had to condense it down into like a almost like an Instagram post type of situation. Yeah, exactly. Was basically that you're not a failure, just the business failed. You know what I mean? Like it's not about, you can't allow that to encompass who you are, because as you've mentioned in our, when we were kind of off air before, I think you said something along the lines of like, you're like a entrepreneur on ADD or something like that. Like, like you're constantly moving around and you're looking at new businesses and new ideas and new things. And I feel that like I'm the same way. And so like, if something doesn't work, it doesn't mean you're a failure. It means that didn't work. Like you, as you mentioned, like learn from it. See, maybe this wasn't the right industry for me. Maybe the idea was cool, but maybe it just didn't work at that time. Right. Yeah. You look at some of these like Tesla just using Elon Musk as an example, they've almost got kind of like forced the progression of electric vehicles, but it's not like Tesla was the first, not by any stretch. There have been electric vehicles for, like the last 100 years to some extent, like, but wasn't at that time. They didn't make it at that time. You know, it was gasoline and all these other different factors that played into it. Now Tesla's becoming a thing, and now you have Rivian, all these other electric companies that are coming up, and even big companies like Honda and stuff that are producing all electric vehicles in mass now. Because again, whether he forced the production of it by sheer will and all that, or whatever, like it just happened that your wave, as far as like an electric car industry, the wave of that came at this moment. There might have been little impact waves later, you know, in earlier years, but this big giant, you know, 40-foot wave that, you know, you can surf your way to a gold medal came now, not previously. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, there's a big part of that, like, so for the person who works on an industry for 4 years, and the whole time people are telling them that it sucks and it's not going to work and it's not going to work. And those are the ones who stay focused. And all of a sudden when the wave does come, they're not only riding it, but they're, you know, riding it, like you said, to the gold medal, because they were aware, they were present for the whole time and looking for the lessons and looking for the trends.
Exactly. 100%.
Part of it. Yeah, man, I love it. And listen, I'm also of the belief that, you know, I talked about my IAMs, I talk about quantum physics. I mean, there's certainly a big piece too, really, that thoughts are things. And the more you decide that I'm going to be successful no matter what, and you create gratitude for that that too, right? You create gratitude for success in advance. You know, the more realistic it's going to show up, and you're going to be open to the opportunities, right? You take the person who is an antique collector, and they might walk into like a garage sale, and they're going to see money all over the place, whereas somebody else sees junk all over the place.
Right.
And it's because they spend so much time looking at these different antiques and looking at these different things and knowing what the value of them is. Sure. And on some level, by thinking, knowing where it is, they're going to be on, and also taking action. Like, you got to go to the garage sale, but the more you think, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, and you're grateful for it, the more these opportunities start to pop up, and you start to see them where other people wouldn't.
Right.
And so it's up to us to decide who we want to be, do something about it every single day, create gratitude for the outcome in advance, and step into our greatness.
All right, Ryan. Well, I really appreciated having you here. Why don't you tell everyone how they can find you and, just where you're at.
Definitely. And again, thank you for the opportunity. So quick and easy, you can find me at ryanstanley.com. That's RyanStanley. If you are interested in my book, which again is called Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful, a first aid kit for the emotional bumps, scrapes, and bruises of life. Obviously, you can get it on my website. If you go to ryanstanley.com and one of the menu buttons that says Be Patient, Be Present, Be Joyful, you can click on that and order the book from there. If you do, you'll get a signed copy directly from me. And depending on my availability, it'll also come with a complimentary coaching session. But if you're just on Amazon and you're used to like fill in the cart, obviously it's there as well. It's on Barnes & Noble, everywhere where books are sold. And COVID's been crazy for a lot of people. If you're not in a space where you want to invest the extra cash right now, there's also a free copy of the book you can download via PDF. And that's at ryanstanley.com/free-ebook.
Nice.
And so we'll put that in the show notes. And then, we did touch on sales earlier. So I just want to mention on the side, those who are interested in sales but are afraid to be the slimy salesperson. It's funny that you mentioned that. I actually have a whole nother company, which is called teachmetosell.com. And that we do specifically work with solo entrepreneurs, like what we call service-oriented solopreneurs. So people who love to serve but hate to sell. Like they're afraid of sales. And so if you want to check out teachmetosell.com, we can help you out there as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Ryan. Everyone, please check him out. And if you have any questions for Ryan or myself, please feel free to message him directly or us as well at team@copyidentity.com. Ryan, once again, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and your efforts. Everyone, thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next time. Bye.
Bye.